Janesville, and welcome back to Park Place Views, the monthly program that aims to keep residents informed by highlighting the people, places, and partners of the City of Janesville. As always, this program is brought to you by the City of Janesville and JATV Media Services. I'm your host, Nick Faust, and I'm the Communications Specialist in the City Manager's Office. Now, on last month's episode, we were joined by the city's Economic Development Director, Jimsy Coborn. With Janesville's continued community growth, it was a great time to sit down with Director Coborn to discuss the city's strategies for encouraging development. If you're interested in viewing that episode or any past episode of the program, they're all available to watch on the city's website or on JATV's YouTube channel. Today, I'm excited to sit down with City Assessor Michelle Lobby. With her office implementing the city's next revaluation, it's the perfect time to gain some insight into the assessment process. But first, a little more about Assessor Lobby. The City of Janesville hired Michelle in 2008 as an assessment technician. Before joining the city team, she began her career with a local real estate firm and later a title company. The city promoted Michelle to property appraiser in 2013 and then deputy assessor in 2015. Finally, in February of 2017, she was promoted to city assessor. Thanks for joining us today, Michelle.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Now, before we get started, I know I always have a bit of a long-winded intro, but I thought I might give you a chance to tell the community a bit more about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a Janesville native. I was born and raised here in Janesville. Left for a little bit for college, but have mainly been here my whole life. So, and I'm proud to call Janesville my home.
Yeah, awesome. Well, and Michelle, being the city assessor, especially in your hometown of all places, it comes with a lot of responsibilities, a lot of duties, and I think the assessment process is perhaps a bit confusing to some folks, maybe myself included. I thought maybe to start, could you walk us through what the city assessor's office really does?
Sure. So we do one thing. We create the assessment roll, but it takes us all year to do that. So, and our year goes from June to June, essentially, instead of the calendar year, January to January. So we're always living 6 months ahead or 6 months behind everybody else. Currently, we're living ahead of everyone because we're already working in 2023 for the revaluation, where everybody else at the city is living in 2022 still. So it's always interesting in our office. So our field cycle starts in typically June or July every year. We're out in the field collecting data until February. Then we're back in the office and we're processing and doing quality control, QCing that data. And then we finally head into sending out our change notices in April or May. And then we head into the appeals process, which is open book and board of review. And then we end the process by submitting our final reports to the Wisconsin Department of Revenue in June. And then we start everything all over again. So we typically view about 3,000 to 4,000 parcels per cycle.
Yeah. And that June to June kind of time frame is your calendar year, so to speak, and that's when that cycle really starts. And so coming into a revaluation year, Michelle, I always also like to maybe highlight the fact that you folks estimate the value of all properties in order to help the city come up with property taxes and a mill rate. But when folks receive those tax bills, is the city the only entity on that bill? Or are we the only ones using those assessments?
No. So we're one of 4 taxing jurisdictions that are a part of that tax bill. So it's the City of Janesville, the School District of Janesville or Milton, depending on where that property owner lives in the community. And then also the Rock County gets a portion of that, and Black Hawk Tech. So each piece of that, and everybody likes to have one phone call to call, right? When they're not happy with that or anything. We're a piece of that tax equation, but we're not the ones who increase or decrease the levy and the amount of taxes that residents pay in the city. So we always say, look at your tax bill. It will show for each taxing jurisdiction in the middle of it, the percent change every year. And you can contact everybody who had a percent change or nobody. This last year, the county and Black Hawk Tech actually had a decrease to their sections. And the City of Janesville lives under strict levy limits that of how much we can raise the tax bills. And the school districts don't live under as strict of levy limits. And with the referendums coming into play that we've seen throughout the state, not only in Janesville and Milton here recently, that has an impactful play too. So
right, so the city being one component on that tax bill, using those assessments, but of course, the four governing bodies of those taxing jurisdictions would be the ones that actually set those mill rates that use your assessments. And so
correct.
You, again, not setting the tax bill for folks, but just an important part of that budgeting process. And you had mentioned Janesville certainly isn't a small community in terms of properties or the number of parcels. Just how many are there in town here?
So taxable parcels in the city, we have 26,400.
Wow.
And that includes real estate and personal property. And then we have an additional roughly 800 exempt parcels throughout the city. So that would include green belts or other city-owned properties, school district properties, churches, et cetera.
Yeah. And with that many parcels then, Michelle, just how does the city assessor's office calculate how much each property owner then is going to contribute with an assessment?
So our assessments, we use a mass appraisal computer system, so that assists us, and we enter in specific costs behind the scenes. So everything's based on a cost per square foot basis.
Yeah.
This is for residential properties. So everything's based off on a cost per square foot, and then based off of market conditions, which either increase or decrease in a revaluation year, we can add or subtract to those cost tables based off of market conditions. For commercial properties, we use the income approach for most of them, and then some of them we use the cost tables for more unique properties that we wouldn't have a lot of comparables to. So the income is based off of specific information that we request from commercial property owners every year. We send out income and expense forms, which we will be doing in December of January of 2023, we'll send out those income and expense forms. And our request of property or commercial property owners throughout the state is that we could get as many of those back as possible. And then we reflect those into different models and tables. So on the residential side, again, it's all based off of that quantitative and qualitative data. So if our data is correct, then their assessment in turn would be correct.
So there's a lot that goes into that and coming up with those assessments. And I think, again, something else to maybe highlight when we talk about that is that doesn't necessarily mean that your staff is visiting each property in Janesville every year, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I have only a staff of 6, including myself. With having over 26,000 parcels, there's no way we could make it to everyone. So we typically view about 10% of our parcel base every year. So within about an 8 or 10 year cycle, we would visit all properties. Here within the last couple of years, we've added in more properties that we haven't been to in over 20 years or more, just to make our data better.
Yeah.
And the goal of our office now is to visit a property once every 10 years. So everybody should see us, whether you live in that property for a long extended time, or you take out permits, or there's a recent sale. Those are other reasons of why we would come and visit that property in between that.
Yeah, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the episode, but outside of that sort of annual cycle, the assessor's office is currently focused on the 2023 citywide revaluation. For folks who might not know what a reval is, could you explain a little more about that process?
Sure. So there's different types of revaluations. One thing, if we did visit every parcel, it would be called a full revaluation. The last time we had a quote to do that back in about 2008, it was over $1 million, because we would have to contract out to have that additional staff to assist us to go to every parcel in the city. So we know that budgetarily we're never going to have the funding to do that. So we will be doing what's called an interim market update. And what that means is that the sales that are occurring currently in 2022 will drive where assessments go for 2023. But in a nutshell, if you wanted a short answer of what is a revaluation, it accounts for the appreciation or depreciation that has occurred since our last revaluation. So in 2019, that was our last revaluation, and we've seen appreciation.
Right.
So we're anticipating about an average increase of 30% for the properties within the city of Janesville.
Okay. And I think that kind of touches on a bit on my next question, Michelle, but since the last revaluation, which I believe occurred in 2019,
correct.
Their viewers can certainly appreciate that the housing market in Janesville has not slowed down at all. It's hotter than it was then. And you kind of talk about with sales happening in 2022 or right now, that's how we kind of get to our figures for the reval. How exactly do those impact property assessments?
So we've seen an increase in market value is what that sale prices or the sale prices that are happening throughout the community. So the goal of a revaluation is to get that market value and assessed value to 100%, where they're relatively about the same. Again, the Wisconsin Department of Revenue oversees what we do in the assessor's office, and the compliance standards or thresholds are if the assessments are within 90 or 110%. So we can be lagging by 10% or over by 10%, and they would consider that to be in compliance. Or in other words, we're in the ballpark of where that property would expect to sell.
Yeah. And I was just about to ask about that mechanism that perhaps requires the city to do a reval, because I understand it is that within that range as set by the state. Is it common that, every 3 to 4 years we would be doing a revaluation? Is it that sort of periodic, or does it just really depend?
It depends. So the city, we've decided to be on a periodic schedule of every 4 years. However, by state statute, and then the Wisconsin Department of Revenue puts out the Wisconsin Property Assessment Manual. So those two items also govern over what we do in the assessor's office. So based off of those, a jurisdiction could be out of compliance thresholds for 5 years, and they would have to do a revaluation in the 6th year. And if the city didn't do that, or the jurisdiction that's out of compliance didn't do that, then the Wisconsin Department of Revenue would come in and do that for them, and then charge the residents a fee to provide that service to bring it back into compliance. So
certainly advantageous for us to be doing it ourselves locally. Now, let's say I own a property and my assessment does change through the course of the reval. Is there a specific way I should look to be notified about that?
Yes. So with an anticipated increase of 30%, I don't anticipate there would be anyone that would not have a change. So everybody in a revaluation, though, regardless of how much they change or if they change or they don't change, will receive an assessment change notice. And those will be sent out in about April or May of this coming spring of 23.
Okay. And, I get that assessment change notice, Michelle, and, I see my property going up in assessed value, and I might start getting ready to call you and being really concerned, because I think that might automatically mean, my taxes are going to go through the roof. Is that true, or is that maybe a misconception?
I would say that's a misconception. Okay. And I'll take maybe a minute to describe it a couple different ways and hopefully bring people to that side of the story, right? So a revaluation just redistributes everyone's proportionate share. Okay. So if you imagine, we used to have a former staff member who used a pizza or a pie as an example. So our total levy is that total pizza. Yeah. And a revaluation just cuts that pizza up differently based off of market values of what share each property owner pays off of that. So our main messaging during the revaluation is the average assessment change. So right now we're anticipating 30%, but it could be that or it could be something different by the time we get to the end and are done collecting and analyzing that data. The main piece for property owners is to look at their assessment change notice, what was the actual average change, and then where's their specific property, where's that individual property they live in, where was that change, and how does that relate to the average? So if they're at the average, they'll expect to pay the same in property taxes. If they're above the average, they'll see an increase, and if they're below that assessment change, the average change, then they'll see a decrease. So it's just kind of distributing all of it based off of market value.
Yeah, and I love that pizza analogy, because we got the pie, and if it's 30% and my assessment is up 30%, that my slice of that pizza pie doesn't increase, it doesn't decrease.
Right, it would stay the same.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And that's super helpful to kind of think through that process. But I mean, let's say now then, Michelle, if after all of this, I'm a property owner and I still think that my assessed value differs from the market value, what can I do then?
So first, the property owners need to review their property record cards that we have on our website. So luckily here in Janesville, our data is out on the website 24/7. There isn't an hour of the day that you can't be bored and be like, oh, I wonder what my assessment data is, and not be able to get to it.
Yeah.
So they can get to that data either through the mapping section or the parcel search sections of our city website. And then just go through and make sure it's correct. If our data is correct, I would say their assessment is more than likely correct. However, if our data is not correct, then they should definitely come and talk to us in the assessor's office, and we can walk through those things. So if they review it and everything seems to be in line, however, they just still don't agree with that, we like to put some work on to the property owners. So first, they should review our list of arm's length sales that we'll have available on the city's website that helped calibrate where our assessments went. They should look at sales that are specifically in their neighborhood, and the list will be sorted by neighborhood on the website. So that will be tools under our assessor section of the site. After that, they should review maybe their homeowner's policy. That will also have an estimate of value of what the home, whoever they use to insure their property feels that property is worth. So that's another gauge that could give them an idea. Also, if they've recently refinanced their property, that appraisal that they had to assist the bank, what did that come in at? Yeah. And is that in the ballpark, again, give or take 10% of where our assessment is? And then they can also contact a local real estate agent and get their opinion of what they feel their property is worth. So there's several different things. If they come and see us during open book, we like them to have some documentation. Right. We're always more than willing to sit down with folks and just explain the process and explain their specific assessment to them. So if they don't have anything, that's fine. But if they really feel that assessment should be different, then they need to bring in some evidence that supports their side of the story.
Right, right. And it sounds like there's certainly many different avenues for those property owners to explore when looking to bring that documentation to you folks. And then it also sounds like, you and your staff are more than happy to work with folks then through that process, through something like open book.
Correct. And they can contact us any time of the year. They don't have to wait till the appeals process if they want to ensure that their data is accurate on their property. So
yeah, good to know. Good to know. And outside then of maybe the average residential property owner, I know sometimes larger companies will appeal property assessments. How do those larger appeals affect your office? Because I imagine that could create some work.
Correct. So every year we have assessment appeals when we have open book and board review, but only when those appeals go into circuit court or further avenues after the board review does it cost the city additional resources. Okay. So we always have appeals. I always say if we don't have appeals, then our assessments aren't close enough to market value, because nobody's complaining about it, right? People aren't going to complain if you're not close to the right answer. So,
yeah. Well, and I think then Michelle, I like to then dovetail into a topic that is always very near and dear to our heart as cities, and that's dark store loopholes. And I think our residents may have heard, the past 4 or 5 years even more about the dark store loophole. But as I understand, it basically how it works its way through is a national or even a local chain store essentially exploits a loophole to lower their assessment, which in turn then shifts the burden onto our other property owners. Could you explain a little more about the dark store loophole and how it affects Janesville property owners?
Sure. So we haven't had as many of these in recent years because jurisdictions have started to have more success in the fight against this theory. So, which is a good thing. It's not that we don't have them anymore. We just are seeing a little bit less of them.
Yeah.
Essentially, property owners use a tax rep that works on a contingency for them. So they get paid only if the appeal is successful in the further appeals process into circuit court. So the basis of the loophole is that they compare a vibrant live property to something that's dark or vacant.
Yeah.
And that's how they say their property isn't worth anything, because if they vacated it, right, then it would be worth nothing. But they want the nothing value in advance of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's my vibrant hardware store, which is doing great business. They would like it compared to an out of business, basically, establishment, at least for assessment.
And a lot of times they'll put use restrictions on the deeds to the next property owners where it can't be that same. We'll use your hardware store example.
Right.
You know, you can't run that same use out of the property which restricts what can happen there, which would obviously make the property maybe worth less because the highest and best use would be to have something similar in there again. So lots of facets to the story. In the end, if they are successful and win in those appeals, it transfers any of the decrease that property owner saw onto everybody else in that taxing jurisdiction. So if they are successful, then everybody else ends up paying more because that total levy that we need to run the city doesn't change. It just shifts the piece of their pie smaller and then distributes it across everybody else to be higher.
Yeah, certainly inequitable and good to hear that, especially in recent years, municipalities are starting to win more of those dark store loophole cases. And props to you and your office for continuing to fight the good fight on that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Michelle, if a viewer at home needs more information about the assessor's office, you kind of touch on our wonderful website. Where can they go for that, or how can they get in touch with your staff?
So, yeah, they can go to the city's website. They can call our office or come in and visit City Hall at any time. If they don't have access to a computer, they could always have us print a property record card and mail it to them, or we could give it to them if they are at City Hall. So lots of different ways to get to us. Our office number, our main line is 608-755-3045. And we look forward to their questions. We know we're going to get many of them. So.
Yes.
One thing that I didn't mention that will be a resource that I forgot earlier in our webs or our tools that will come out, we'll have like a revaluation piece of the assessor section of the website, is the estimated tax calculator.
Okay.
So I'm just going to talk about that quick. That takes, so it will ask them what their prior year's assessment was. So once they get that change notice, all this data is on there. They'll just need to keep that change notice. And the estimated tax calculator will be out there as soon as we send those notices out. So they can put in their old value, then their proposed new value, and it will give them an estimate of the difference in what they could expect to see in taxes. So all of that is set up, and again, I highly state estimated tax calculator because it's before the city, the county, Black Hawk Tech, and the school districts all go through their budget process, right? So our change notices come out in the spring, and then the budget process starts like now in August and the remainder of fall. So the estimate will be based on if they got that tax bill the year prior, based off of the mill rates that we know from the year before. So it'll be based off of 22 data. But it will be a decent estimate for them. And then as you hear, you know, that the city's going to have an increase to their budget, or the school district is going to have an increase to their budget, they can know that that's going to change a little bit more, but it's not going to be the extreme difference. We're already going to have accounted for that. If there is one, which again, if they're at the average change, they would see no change in what they pay in tax, other than if those taxing jurisdictions increase the total levy that everybody needs to run. So it's just, we try to put as much information out there for property owners to make them more comfortable with the situation that we can.
Yeah, that knowledge is power, and being informed certainly helps folks, as you said, to understand the process and feel more comfortable as a part of that process. And that estimated calculator tool certainly sounds like a tremendous resource as folks are maybe starting to budget as a family unit for the next year's tax bill. And that about does it, I think, for us today, Michelle. The assessment process can certainly be complicated, and it's always helpful to have you and your insight. So before I think we leave then, is there anything I think you would want viewers to know about your office and your staff?
Sure. So we're local. We're here, right? We're not an office that's just a phone number. We have staffing hours every day from 7:30 to 4:30. So if they have questions, to just reach out and contact us.
Fantastic. Well, and thank you for joining us today, Michelle. As I said, having you on the show is perfect for helping our viewers better understand really everything that goes into assessing. The work you and your folks do is critical, and I think your office's commitment to working with the community and that information piece is so beneficial to the process and really quite admirable, so thank you.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank you, our viewers and residents, for tuning in today and for all you do to help make Janesville a community of choice to realize life's opportunities. I invite you to stay connected with the city by following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, signing up for emergency notifications from the JPD via the Nixle app, and signing up to receive our weekly city press releases by visiting www.janesvillewi.gov/email list. I also want to encourage you to tune into the program next month when I sit down with Recreation Director Shelley Slapak. With the Rec Division busy rolling out all the fun in their brand new fall-winter activity guide, Shelley is sure to give us some timely insight into all the upcoming rec fun in Wisconsin's Park Place. For Park Place Views in the City of Janesville, I'm Nick Faust. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next month.